Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk for the Left Hook Substack. It's a brand new year, and this year we have a new president. Yes, the old guy, Donald Trump, is coming back. The same person who incited a violent insurrection 4 years ago, a convicted criminal, a man who's been liable for sexual assault and for defamation, and a man, as of today's recording, wants to grab foreign countries by the you-know-what, whether they like it or not, whether it's Greenland, an ally, or Mexico, or Canada, or the Panama Canal. Hey, when you're president, they let you get away with it. But not all of us are bending the knee like Zuckerberg and Bezos and other billionaires of the oligarchy. Some of us are resisting and trying our best not just to restore democracy, but to reform it. So it could become something that has never been really in this America, a true beacon of equity and equality for the rest of us. But we also have to look at the current moment and see what will happen under the Trump regime. Where will we go? What is the end game? And to answer that big question about democracy's end, or rather the threats to democracy under the Trump regime, I have Ian Basson. He is joining us again. He is one of the rare two-timers to Chai Talk. He's the co-founder and executive director of Protect Democracy. He previously served as associate White House counsel, and he is a certified genius because he is the recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship Grant, otherwise known as the Genius Grant. So don't take my word for it. Take Ian's word for it. Ian is joining us from my hometown of the Bay Area, where he told me it is beautiful as I'm here in Snowden, Virginia, facing punishing colds, and now I'm regretting my life choices. But Ian, you look chill, relax. You got a nice little sun-coated tan on you, and here I am, just friggin' trying my best to survive in snow-filled Virginia. How are you, sir?
I'm good because I didn't know that there's a select club of two-timers on Chai Talk, and I want to know if, like hosting Saturday Night Live, when I get up to like four or five, do I get a jacket or something? Because then
You
I might have to come back
you
more
will
often.
get a Chai Talk mug with a five-timer mug. Yes, but Scarlett Johansson and Steve Martin won't be there. It'll be other nerds who pretty much want to protect democracy. So as long as you're comfortable being in that august company with a mug, my friend, welcome back anytime.
Great. I'm working towards my mug.
uh, you know, uh, we're recording this on January 7th, a day after Kamala Harris and Democrats did their part and certified the election as one has to, according to the Constitution. There was no violent insurrection. There were no angry Viking hats and flagpoles and weapons carried by MAGA insurrectionists. Feces was not smeared within the Capitol. Mike Pence and other elected officials were not running for their lives. It was smooth. This is what happens sometimes in elections. You know, your guy wins, and sometimes your guy loses. And here we are, Ian, on January 7th, and Donald Trump is going to become the president again. He is a criminal, and he did a rambling press conference. I don't know if you saw, where he promised very punishing tariffs against our allies, Canada and Mexico. He wants to make Canada 51st state. He wants to buy Greenland, even though Greenland has repeatedly said it's not for sale. He has not ruled out the use of military force to acquire Greenland and the Panama Canal. The special report by Special Investigator Jack Smith was temporarily barred by a MAGA brown shirt, the judge. And all things look bleak, sir. And so the question I have for you, and you told me you've been thinking about this, right? Let's tease this out, you know, because some people, and I think you disagree with them just like I do. I'm sure you've heard some folks, usually they're very privileged, well off. They've said the following: it'll be fine. It'll be okay. Don't worry. This institutions will hold. You freak out too much. Your response to that, and what you have been thinking about, you know, the parallels that we've seen in the past, and I'll just give one that I've written about, you know, with the oligarchy bending the knee, reminds me of the industrialists during the Nazi regime. Hey, Hitler will be good for business, but we don't have to go across the pond, right? You said that there's parallels in American history, so I'll let you take the floor. Tell us where you want to start.
Well, I mean, I think when you ask the question of whether it's going to be all right or not, the next question you ask is on what timeline? Because I think there's a different answer when you're talking about the next couple of years than when you're talking about a little bit further into the future. And let me say what I mean by that. I think the next couple of years are going to be very, very uncomfortable
Mm,
and harmful to this country and to, frankly, a lot of the most vulnerable people in it. Um, when I think of parallels, the scholar at the Carnegie Endowment, Rachel Kleinfeld, has urged me to look at the early and mid 19th century and the presidency and aftermath of Andrew Jackson. And I think there's a lot to be learned by looking at the Jackson era
mm,
in terms of trying to understand the present era. So Jackson runs for office on the promise of mass deportations. In that case, it was Native Americans.
hmm
Uh, and he comes to office on the claims that he had been actually prevented from winning in the prior election because of a corrupt deal, his version of stop the steal. In that case, it was that in the prior election, John Quincy Adams had cut a deal with Henry Clay that sort of froze Jackson out of the presidency. So, what did Jackson do in response to feeling like he was improperly deprived of the presidency? He announced right away that he was running. He ran essentially for 4 years in the way that Donald Trump did. And when he eventually did come to power, he said, "I am, sort of the will of the public, and all of the institutions and all of the so-called elites and all of the law be damned." He was dismissive of the rule of law and of law as a constraint. He governed as an authoritarian. Famously, when the Supreme Court ruled in a way he didn't like, he said, "Well, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it,"
Yeah.
and essentially thumbed his nose at the court. And I would note that when Donald Trump was elected the first time, what did he do? He put a portrait of Andrew Jackson in
Yeah.
the Oval Office. He very much sees Jackson as a model. And I would also note that Jackson was president during an era of American territorial expansion. It was sort of the Jackson era that led to this idea of manifest destiny and sort of leading to a war with Mexico to conquer the American Southwest and add the Oregon Territory and California. So Trump, when he talks about expanding American territory into Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, I do not think he's joking. I think he very much sees that as sort of, he's a real estate guy, he's a land guy. I think he very much sees that as part of what he is intending to do. But because he doesn't really have a respect for our constitutional system, doesn't really have a respect not only for the law, but frankly for anything that might oppose him or stand in his way. And there's still a sizable population of this country that does care about our constitutional system, that does care about the rights of individuals and groups within this country, that does care about following a democratic process. Everybody like us who care about those things are going to be bruised badly by the way that Trump is going to try to get his way, come hell or high water, no matter what the rules of the law or the will of the people or the rights of individuals have to say about it. So I think in the short term, the system is not going to necessarily hold. At our organization, we wrote a whole document, the Authoritarian Playbook 2025, available at authoritarianplaybook2025.org, that goes through how the things that constrain Trump the first time, and they didn't constrain him entirely. He did a lot of damage the first time. He has figured out ways, and the system is rewarding him with tools to be able to override them this time. So I think in the short run, it's going to be very, very destabilizing, harmful, and destructive. But over a longer period, I also think we have an opportunity. Because if you look back at American history, you also find that every major advance to try to achieve what you rightly pointed out, Laj, has never existed in this country, which is a truly inclusive,
Mm,
truly pluralist, truly multiracial, truly representative democracy where everyone really has a fair seat at the table. Not only does that not exist in this country, really has never existed anywhere around the world, but every big advance we've made towards that goal has been preceded by a period of crisis and conflict. Right. The initial Constitution came after the Revolution. Reconstruction came after the Civil War. The civil rights era came on the tail end of the Depression and two world wars. And so if we see that model of that opportunity comes out of crisis, then I think over the medium to longer term, the destruction that we are likely to see now has the potential to give birth like a phoenix to a stronger form of democracy in the 21st century than we've ever had. And I think the task for us is how do we mitigate the damage in the short term to create the opportunity for some greater advance coming off the backside of the damage that's to come.
Before we get to hope and optimism, let's just stay with despondency and
Sure,
the
why,
current,
right,
the
why
current,
not?
the current reality, the shit show that is the Trump administration and America voluntarily ceding its democracy and freedoms to the oligarchy. You know, you mentioned Andrew Jackson. I want to stay there for a second because you rightly pointed out that this is nothing new. They have been enamored by they. I'm talking about Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump by the Andrew Jackson presidency. You know, Andrew Jackson was a white supremacist, a racist, a war criminal. You know, his attack was against Native Americans. You know, the Trail of Tears was under Jackson, a genocidal campaign that just utterly devastated those communities. And as of today, again, one of the things I failed to mention, because there was a lot, is that Donald Trump is having his freedom fries moment and declared that he will rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It has a beautiful ring to it. So it's fascinating, right? The same people who said that he's non-interventionist and he's America first are perfectly fine with him potentially escalating military and economic conflicts with our allies. And the people who are for law and order are perfectly fine with a criminal. And I want to talk about, how the rest of us eventually will have to, we'll get to the good parts later, the hopeful parts, the resistance part. But let's break down where we are right now, because what I'm seeing, Ian, just in the past week, is that unlike before, uh, corporations, CEOs, billionaires, they're not even giving the pretense of resistance, right? So let's start with that. That's one factor that has been common throughout American history. It's not just racists and white supremacists and authoritarians. It's also corporate America, the wealthy. They've been complicit in this agenda, right? We've seen Mark Zuckerberg, we've seen Tim Cook, we've seen pretty much the head of AI, we've seen Bezos. We've seen, unlike before, the CEOs, they rushed to greet him at the New York Stock Exchange a couple of months ago, 2 months ago, right after the election. Uh, this angle, the fact that this is so naked, so shameless, the fact that Elon Musk, the richest man on earth, is coming out openly saying, yep, I gave $250 million to get Trump elected. And guess what? It worked out well. No one cared. Now I'm going to interfere in UK's democracy and in Germany's democracy. I have not seen this type of naked, shameless interference by the oligarchy in my lifetime.
You want us to wallow in the despair, and I'll do that briefly, but I will not give up on
No,
the
no,
hope
my
side
me
of
either,
things.
me either.
I'm going to talk about the downside and the upside because, as always, I am reminded by the stuff behind you up there that we have to cling to the force, and there's a force element to this as well. The dark side and the force, and the dark side element of this, as you note, is that one of the reasons why I do think things are going to get worse before they get better is because Trump has succeeded in creating the incentives for key institutional leaders to try to cozy up to him and engage in what the historian Tim Snyder has called anticipatory obedience.
Mm,
Um, and so you are seeing something happen that didn't happen the first time he was in office, which is media companies, major tech titans and corporate leaders, rather than viewing his election as they did in 2017 as some sort of aberration
mm,
that they themselves were personally alarmed by and felt it was their civic job or probably also in their best interest to oppose. They now see it as having a mandate, as being somewhat inevitable, and that Trump has power over them, and they need to sort of cozy up to them. And the one thing I found frustrating about the news coverage the day that we're recording this about Meta changing some of its content moderation policies and Mark Zuckerberg putting a close Donald Trump ally on the board of Meta is that those stories did not note in the first paragraph that this comes after Donald Trump threatened to put Mark Zuckerberg in prison for the rest of his life. In order to understand what Zuckerberg is doing, you have to understand that fact. We can have all sorts of interesting conversations about what the proper content moderation policy should be for a social media network, whether the existing fact-checking regime is perfect or suboptimal or terrible. Those are legitimate conversations to have, and we should have them. But to not note that Zuckerberg is doing that on the heels of Trump threatening to put him in prison for the rest of his life is a disservice to the readers of the story because it misses the entire context in which something is happening, which is deeply dangerous. And so, yes, it is quite alarming the way that big money is posing up to Donald Trump, the way that people like Elon Musk are trying to throw their financial weight around to interfere in democratic decision making around the world. But, but in that also lies some opportunity, because the other thing that we are seeing happen is that this coalition that Donald Trump has put together has a lot of very, very deep internal contradictions in it.
Mm.
On the economic side, he has married a sort of right wing, working class economic populist surge with a corrupt, oligarchic, wealthy segment. That contradiction is going to begin to create fissures and ruptures within
Already
Trump
has.
world. That's already has. You saw it with the H-1B visa fight. If you listen to Steve Bannon's podcast yesterday, it
Yeah.
opens with a tirade against Elon Musk, right? Bannon versus Musk. Um, and so that fissure, and that is going to come home to roost when they try to do this one big, beautiful reconciliation package that is somehow going to have to sort of deliver goods for two very opposite ends of sort of the American economic spectrum. That's going to be very, very hard to do. Second, I think you're going to see this on sort of the global politics stage, where on the one hand, Trump has built a coalition that says he's going to be the peace president. He's going to end all this international conflict and war. And on the other hand, he's threatening to use military force against Mexico. Those two things are in deep contradiction and tension with each other. And as you note, a third one, he has taken a Republican Party that largely over the last many years has sold itself, and Trump sold himself as well, as the party of law and order, while at the same time basically being someone who thumbs his nose at the rule of law, who he's going to pardon people who attacked law enforcement, and is already inspiring. And I wrote about this last night, is already inspiring Republican officials at lower levels of government to thumb their nose at the law. We had this wild thing happen in New York City yesterday, where a Republican councilwoman essentially encouraged people to sabotage law enforcement's attempt to implement the new congestion pricing plan in New York by suggesting people take lasers and point them at the law enforcement cameras that are designed to set up to charge people the tolls that have been implemented by the law, and essentially sabotage them and disable them. When on earth have we seen Republican electeds encouraging people to engage in sort of sabotage vigilante violence against law enforcement apparatus? That's the fallout of Donald Trump sort of thumbing his nose at the rule of law. Those contradictions and tensions are going to really hobble, I think, some of Trump's attempts to do this, and they are the Achilles heel in his presidency and his effort. And I think one thing that I will actually credit Chuck Schumer for right now, that I think a lot of folks may not appreciate fully in sort of the space you and I are in, more of an activist spaces, Schumer realizes that right now the Democrats don't have a lot of institutional authority and power on Capitol Hill. And the most likely way that Trump's sort of agenda gets slowed down is infighting among Republicans. And to the
Mm.
extent that that infighting happens, I think one thing that Democrats and left-leaning activists are going to need to do is get out of the way, because the real danger right now to Trump's ability to do this is going to be the internal contradictions in this coalition, more than some of the institutional levers that for example, Democrats have on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and we've already seen two examples of that: the fighter of H-1B visa, and also the government spending bill, which was perfectly fine, but at the last second, the shadow president Elon Musk came out on X and said no. And then Mike Johnson and other Republicans said okay, and then Donald Trump went along with Elon Musk, and then also with the H-1B visas, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and other billionaires mocked and ridiculed Trump supporters. Elon Musk called them contemptible fools and reshared posts which referred to them as quote retards. And Donald Trump again swung for Elon Musk. So Musk is two for two. Trump has sided with Musk twice in the past 3 weeks against the MAGA base. I'm here for the MAGA civil war. There's that great meme from Godzilla where Ken Watanabe's character says, "Let them fight." But you need the
100%.
you want the
100%.
go ahead.
And it may be that some of the Broligarchs have won a couple of the early rounds, but I feel like some of these Broligarchs dropped out of school before they got to the part about France in the 18th century, and they
Right.
never read Jack Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World. And I think they probably should. Because if they keep winning these fights, I tell you what, the base of that party is going to come for them. And so, and to your point, let them fight, right? Because Bannon is not going to put up with Elon Musk squashing the populist agenda for long before he rallies the troops against him and let them fight. I think one way we might think about it is there's two coalitions right now in co-ed, uh, potentially in this country. There's a coalition that is behind Trump and a much more illiberal authoritarian vision of this country, and it has all the contradictions that we just noted. And there is a coalition that has opposed that authoritarian vision that prevailed in every election between 2016 and 2024. It fell short in 2016, it fell short in 2024, but it won every election in between, right? And the question going forward is, which of those coalitions can tighten its bonds, expand itself, and hold itself together, and which of them is going to fracture and rupture? And the answer to that question, I think, will almost overwhelmingly dictate the next 10 years of American government and politics. And what those who believe in a more liberal democratic vision of the society need to ensure, those who want to oppose authoritarianism need to ensure, is that the coalition Trump has put together is the one that fractures, and the coalition that believes in some aspirational version of liberal democracy is the one that holds together. And that means all of us listening, you and I need to think about, how do we make sure that the coalition we are a part of that does not want to see authoritarianism or a corrupt oligarchy prevail in this country, how do we make sure that coalition holds together? We have many deep disagreements within it. We have many good faith, good held different strategies, ideas, things that we want to prioritize within our coalition. And yet we have to make sure that above all, that coalition holds together. And we have all sorts of loyal and friendly wrestling and disagreements, but we hold the coalition together and get out of the way while the other side's coalition fractures. That is the single most important thing that we need to do over the next 5 to 10 years to ensure that we get to that place where we are able to kind of shape an opportunistic agenda for a stronger democracy and avoid sort of the darker future that could befall us if we let our own coalition be the one that
Well,
fractures.
it leads to my point that a lot of people are looking to the Democrats not out of fidelity or fealty to the Democratic Party, but a realization that it's the only other political force that we have that can oppose the MAGA agenda. But there's also frustration that they're not meeting the moment with the righteous fire, the power, the vigor, the fight. Instead, they're somewhat being complicit. Even President Biden in his Washington Post op-ed, which I thought was very milquetoast, didn't mention the word Trump or MAGA on
Yeah.
January 6th, right? And there, just today, as of this recording, I think about 48 House Republicans went along with 48 House Democrats went along with the Republican legislation to deport those undocumented immigrants who were simply charged, not convicted, but charged with nonviolent offenses, right? And you see this anger, this rage, Ian, that to the point where the type of dissatisfaction and apathy with not just the Democratic Party, but the establishment. I've never witnessed that before. And you saw that in 2024, where a lot of people said, nah, if these people ain't going to fight, so be it. Do you think the Democratic Party, with its current leadership, its current makeup, its current mindset, is equipped for the type of fight that you're laying out?
Well, first off, we have a problem in this country with a two-party duopoly that is part of why we are in the crisis that we're in. And so over the medium and longer term, when we think about sort of strengthening and improving our democracy, one of the ingredients in doing that is breaking this two-party duopoly. And some of the work that we're working on with trying to re-legalize fusion voting, with trying to move us more in the direction of having a more proportional system that's not winner take all, first past the post, those are ingredients in doing that. But until we get there, and you're not going to get there tomorrow, and you're not going to get there necessarily by the 2026 election, maybe not even in some cases by the 2028 election, we have to play the hand that we have been dealt. And the
Yeah.
hand that we have been dealt means that right now, the only existing organized, nationally strong political party in this country that has the potential to win a national election against a more Trumpian authoritarian agenda is the Democratic Party, for better or for worse. It has its faults, it has its flaws. It is what we have. So we have to find a way to make it work. And I think that brings me to another thing that we all need to that let me, rather than telling other people what to do, I'll tell you how I try to approach this. And again, I'm gonna point to the Millennium Falcon behind you, which is You'll recall the scene when Luke is battling Vader in front of the Emperor, and Luke has an opportunity after Vader falls to strike down the Emperor, and the Emperor says to him, "Let the hate flow through me,
Right.
strike me down." Um, and Luke, in that moment, could give in to the anger. He could give in to the hate. He could actually thrash his enemy and his opponent and strike him down. But what is implied in that moment is if he does so, he will actually turn to the dark side. That letting that much hate control you is a recipe for turning yourself into something ill, something that we don't want to be. And what Luke has to do in that moment is he has to recognize that there's another way to win.
Mm.
And he ultimately prevails, but not by letting the hate flow through him. And as you talked about the anger that we feel, and I feel it often towards things that I find deeply frustrating about members of our own coalition, allies, politicians, Democratic Party, what have you. So I have to remind myself that what we don't need more of in American politics right now is anger, grievance, and hate. Those are the ingredients that feed authoritarianism. They are the ingredients that feed the dark side. That is exactly what Donald Trump wants us to feel. They feed strongman politics. We need more wisdom. That does not mean that we don't fight, right? It does not mean that we don't stand up for what is right. It does not mean that we sort of abdicate to a darker vision and let it take over. I'm not suggesting appeasement. I'm not suggesting withdrawal or retreat. I'm suggesting strategic wisdom, that anger and hate lead to unwisdom. And when we are feeling that frustration, especially towards people that we need to be part of our coalition, if we let the hate flow through us, we will destroy our coalition and we will allow Donald Trump to win. And so, in those moments, what I remind myself is as frustrated as I am by a decision that someone else is making that I think is ill informed, unstrategic, not leading to the right place, I can't let the hate flow through me. I need to think about how I bring more wisdom to the situation and hold that coalition together. And I think the more we are regulating ourselves to be wise Jedis in this moment, the more likely it is we will topple the evil empire.
I want to extend that Return of the Jedi analogy and metaphor that you've used for my final question, because a lot of people assume, like you did, I did growing up, we're the Jedi. Everyone wants to be the hero of the story, or your Han Solo, or your Princess Leia. But the reality is, most of us are just Ewoks, right? We're just these overly hairy, kind of like
I can see
inconsequential.
you and I have not shaved because we're
Yeah,
trying to be Ewoks.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
just Ewoks. We're just, we don't have superpowers. Sure, we might be one with the Force, but that doesn't grant us Jedi powers, right? We're just moseying along, trying to get by. And yet the Ewoks were critical, for better or for worse, to helping topple the Empire. It was the Ewoks with their sticks and their rocks, right, who joined forces with the
Tie a rope
Jedi's.
around a tree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but it worked, and so most of us, I know that people might be offended by this, but we're not Jedi's, we're Ewoks, and I say this because most people can feel so apathetic, right? That's one of the goals of fascism, is to overwhelm you, to exhaust you. We're not the Democratic Party, we're not the Democratic establishment, we don't have the money, we're not the oligarchy, right? We're just people trying to get by, but there are small moments of resistance throughout history in which average Joes and Janes and Jose's and Ewoks have banded together and brought down regimes. And so, what's the role of the average Joe and Jane and Jose who's watching right now, who feels so overwhelmed? The man hasn't even assumed power yet, and I've already gotten feedback from people saying, "Bro, I'm exhausted. My God, Greenland." Canada, Mexico, bird flu, what the F, RFK, no vaccines, right? What do you recommend the person watching right now who does not have access to the Democratic Party like you do, who does not have access to the Washington Post or CNN, who does not have access to funders? What can they do?
Oh, I can't believe that you just teed up this question, which we just to tell people we did not plan for, but you've set me up so well to actually promote something that we just published yesterday, which is
This
a
is why
piece
you pay me
called
the big money.
That's amazing. A piece called How You Can Protect Democracy. So we send it out at our newsletter, ifyoucankeepit.org. If you go to that site right now, you will see the headline, How You Can Protect Democracy. And what it is it's 29 concrete actions that people can take right now to not just protect, but improve our system of government. And it picks through them and suggests that over the next year, See how many you can work through. See how many you can share with others. It starts with really understanding the levers of power that we have. I love the Ewok analogy. It says, hey, what sticks do we have? What are
Mm.
the ways that we can sort of lay some traps in the dirt here, metaphorically speaking? And then how to then begin to start executing on those at the local level. And I think the thing that I really like about the guide is it recognizes that at the end of the day, democracy is a local endeavor. Alexis de Tocqueville, when he toured America, talked about the democratic habits of the heart that he saw in the American people he was meeting, that really for all of the calligraphy that was on parchment, all of the constitutional text, statutes, or laws, none of that actually could create
Mm.
a democracy. What creates democracy is how people interact in their personal lives with their neighbors and their communities. And a lot of the things that my colleague Quinn Raymond wrote down in this guide is how you can begin to strengthen those habits of the heart in your own life, with your own neighbors, in your own communities, that ladders up to what becomes a stronger national system of democracy, and ultimately one far more inclusive, far more fair and just than the one de Tocqueville observed in 1830. We need to make sure that by 2030, we are delivering a democracy that doesn't just work at the national level, but one that works at the local level as well. And so I would steer people to that as an answer to
I
your
want to
question.
quickly tease it. People, you go read those 29 actions, but to tease it, what are one or two that top of your head you would really recommend people do of those 29?
So, first off, who is your local representative in your most local form of government? For me, it's my city council. How do I invite 10 people from my neighborhood over for tea, for coffee, or chai time,
Mm.
right? And talk about what are the things that we can do right in this community to bring us together as a community with our local representative to make one concrete improvement in our daily lives. And I say one because one of the things that is feeding the authoritarianism crisis in the world right now, not just this country, is a feeling of a lack of agency,
Yeah.
that we are losing control over a world that is spinning beyond our ability to keep up, and that our systems of government are no longer representing us. We no longer feel like we have agency. We are simply victims of a world that is spinning out of control. And the more we can establish that we still do have agency, and the place that we have the greatest level of agency is over our local community and our local elected official, the more we can begin to rebuild the habits and strengthen the muscles that are required to strengthen democracy at a national level. And so by having that meeting and say, what's the one thing we can do? We can actually put a new stoplight on the corner where there had been a stop sign, but there have been too many accidents because there's too much traffic for a stop sign. We need a stoplight there.
Yeah.
And if we, as a small community, can get together and do that, we can build the muscle that will allow us to then do that at the state level, and then at the congressional level, and then at the presidential level. But all politics is local, and we all need to start there.
And traffic, that one issue, has helped Democrats win public office, folks. So don't underestimate local issues. Don't underestimate your voice. And I, for one, Ian, am always hopeful. At the same time, I'm a pragmatist, and I appreciate you at least starting us off acknowledging that we're in it. This is going to be the long walk. It's going to be tough. We can't tap out. There's not going to be any fix overnight. The Avengers aren't coming to save us. Everyone has a role. Yes, even the Ewoks have a role with their sticks and stones. And another analogy I'll make is Andor, the show on Disney right now. If you're watching it, no superpowers. All those Star Wars characters are average Joes and Janes and Jose's who are trying to survive under the heel and boot of the Empire. And yet, without their efforts, spoiler alert, Luke Skywalker is never able to blow up the Death Star. Luke Skywalker gets the medal, but without the sacrifice of those individuals who are oftentimes nameless, the rebels would not win. So I know everyone wants to be Luke Skywalker or Chewbacca or R2D2 or Princess Leia, but many of us are just the Ewoks and Andor, and we all have a role to play. Ian, shamelessly promote yourself, sir.
Please go on to ifyoucoulkeepit.org, sign up for the things that you can do to help protect democracy. We will try to provide you as much information as possible, and it is a pleasure to be a fellow Ewok Waj with you and with all the other Ewoks listening.
Ian Basson is doing the good work. He's the co-founder and executive director of Protect Democracy. I'll link to all the beautiful articles he just mentioned. He previously served as an associate White House counsel. And folks, don't listen to me. Listen to Ian. He, again, is a genius, a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship Grant. Ian, thanks so much for stopping by. Next time, you'll get the pivoted three-time member of Chai Talk. And once you hit 5, I will give you a mug. Everyone, until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay hopeful, do what you can. Do not obey in advance. Until next time, this has been Chai Talk with Wajat Ali for the Left Hook Substack.